Welcome to the Alex Salmond Show and to our look at the party conference season through the eyes of those who are well placed to take an overview of the great issues affecting their parties. Next week, the Tories gather in Birmingham and yet again, Europe threatens to split the party asunder. But is there a voice from the party's past who can point the way to the future? First, of course, to your tweets, emails and messages, and we've had a great response to our show last week on the idea of a centrist party. Shirley says, former politicians by party discussing a new centre party was helpful to knowing UK future post-Brexit. Donald says, new party in same system is just another political gravy train, whilst Parliament is sovereign over folk. Time Scotland pushed for independence again to escape this quagmire. The dream is alive and walking 500 miles. And finally, Jacqueline says, I wouldn't be interested in a UK centre party unless all efforts for Scottish independence fail. In that case, a UK centre party would be a great idea. I would support a centre party hypothetically in Scotland though. Now to the Tory party in Birmingham. Back in the politics of the 1980s and 90s, which I barely remember of course, but Alex is very much a part of, one woman dominated and divided the country, the Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher. But then the second best known politician with the public, more famous even than the leader of the opposition, was the Minister for Health, Edwina Currie. Although a huge admirer of Margaret Thatcher, Edwina still stood firmly on the pro-European side in the Tory splits of the 1990s. Her ministerial career was cut short by a raging controversy from an unexpected direction, salmonella in egg production. But her public role then blossomed into books, radio and television. Once described as a woman with a brass neck, a silver tongue and a golden pen, the ever-lively Edwina has some typically straight-talking for those who seek to inherit the Tory crown from Theresa May. Alex caught up with her in her Derbyshire home.
Edwina Curry, in the 1980s and 90s, you were the second best known politician in the country and the second best known woman politician in the country, second only to Margaret Thatcher. But let's say a young Edwina Curry was going to the Conservative conference in Birmingham, a city you know very well. What speech would you be making about Europe this week? What would you be saying to the party now?
Well, the speech I was making there was about the police.
Well, let's just imagine you were speaking about Europe.
March 29th, we are officially out of the EU, and I don't think there's any going back on that. And I'm hopeful, and I'm optimistic that, in fact, the trade deals we do with the rest of the world will be very, very successful. Europe itself has turned out to be quite protectionist. So you have free trade within the 400 million, but you haven't got much in the way of free trade with the outside world.
It doesn't stop Germany doing lots of deals with China.
It doesn't stop us doing lots of deals with China. But we are much more likely to do all of this and to be upfront about it.
You know, Bertie Ahern, the Irish Taoiseach, who you'll know, told me a few weeks ago on this show, he said, it's all very well doing all these new deals, he says, but you don't give up the ones you've got while you're doing them. Is there not a bit of logic in that?
Now, of course there's a bit of logic in that, and I do wish you'd go and tell people in Brussels. Actually, Alex, with your powers of persuasion, you would make a cracking good job. I want you to pin Michel Barnier to the wall and say in your best Scottish brogue, and whatever is the local dialect, that he's being an idiot, because what he's doing is disadvantaging the rest of Europe.
Michel Barnier is a French Gaullist by background. Generally speaking, you don't pin them to the wall very much, as I remember French Gaulists. But this whole argument, you lived through as a parliamentarian the Maastricht debates, as I did, tearing the Conservative government apart in the 1990s. Do you see the same thing happening again with Theresa May's government? Do you see the same extraordinary bitterness and division over Europe?
It's a strange world to be in. I went to a lunch that Jacob Rees-Mogg addressed not long ago, a Conservative lunch. And I asked him, which do you think was the worst outcome? A bad Brexit or Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister? Now, for most Tories, it has to be Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister because, as Margaret made it quite clear, we fight socialism. We fight a whole economic and philosophical regime. And Jacob went on and on about Brexit. And I thought to myself, I think you've lost the plot, mate.
Surely Jacob would argue, well, with his sense of history, way back to the Norman conquest in his speeches, that a Jeremy Corbyn premiership would be a passing phase, whereas Brexit, as he would think, is forever.
Well, I think what you're going to have to do is interview him and find out exactly what he would say. I like Saeed Javid. He comes from a very successful family. His father was a bus driver. He brought up 4 successful sons. That takes some doing. And I like the way he's approached being Home Secretary, where he seems to have cut through a lot of the dead wood and taken decisions very, very quickly, particularly on things like Windrush and so on. I like some of the next layer people, and I think they haven't been treated terribly well. Tobias Ellwood, for example, who was a Defence Minister at Minister of State level, when the vacancy came up for Secretary of State for Defence, he should simply have been promoted. But that idiot Gavin Williamson put himself in the job. He knows...
It's the man with the tarantula.
He knows less about defence than I do. A very important quality in politics that the Conservative Party's always been very good at is a kind of shrewd pragmatism. So you look at the world as it is, you know what your philosophy and your principles are. I mentioned them all about freedom and responsibility, and this fear of being controlled by the state, whoever the state may be. And you think how you're going to get the best prosperity for your people, the most reliable and sustainable future life. I can't see a socialist government led by Corbyn being able to do that. I can see a Conservative government being able to do that. Probably not one run by Jacob Rees-Mogg, though.
How would you lay down the law in the Tory party just now? What would your approach be to the recalcitrants?
I don't think anybody really wants to take over trying to negotiate with Brussels, not really. What Boris and a couple of the others are trying to do is stir it so that as and when she retires, then they will be well placed with the active membership of the Conservative Party.
To inherit the kingdom.
To inherit the kingdom. They may get a nasty surprise because the Tories are no fools. The people who've been members of the party for a long time, like I have seen leaders come and go. I think what we'd like is someone as strong as Margaret, but perhaps as principled as Margaret. Boris doesn't cut it for me, because if there's one thing you'd be pretty sure of, and I think Max Hastings nailed him pretty well, he is a man without principle. He's a member of a party of one, and he wants to be Prime Minister.
Julian Critchley, who was a very erudite and Conservative MP in the 1990s, he once wrote that you had, as he put it, a brass neck, a silver tongue, and a golden pen. Now, which of these attributes served you best as a woman in politics?
How about that as a compliment, eh? I love it. Brass neck was the first, in the sense that I come from Liverpool, I'm a Scouser. I used to talk like that, was lucky enough to go to a very old-fashioned city grammar school that had been set up many years, a century or so before, and from there was able to win a scholarship to Oxford. So I benefited from meritocracy. And then you get to uni and you look around at all these people who have these wonderful privileges, and you think, but I'm as smart as you are. And you start to learn how to use the skills that their great public schools have taught them, how to speak in public, how to write. I went to the kind of school where you had to do an essay 3 times a week, but nonetheless, to be able to write for a newspaper, to be able to write a column, to be able to write your own speeches and so on, to different style. And you start looking at them and learning how to do it. And those opportunities really then present themselves to you as an MP, but they also enable you to get into that situation.
So Margaret Thatcher elevates you to Health Minister pretty quickly, for the reasons you said, but also for the reasons you didn't say, which you were a talented politician and she recognised that. And you pursue a vigorous agenda as Health Minister, and then are engulfed in the egg scandal. Now, did your brass neck, was that essential to get through that? I mean, it ended in your resignation, but even when you speak to people now, if you say the name Edwina Currie, they say, curried eggs or make some reference to it. Very few political controversies have lasted that length of time.
Well, could I say, first of all, that being a health minister under Margaret was a wonderful experience because she was actually a radical prime minister. If you could convince her of something, she would say, go for it. And she'd give the opportunities and the finances and the wherewithal to get things happening. She would fire questions at you. And you had to have the figures. You had to have everything written on the inside of your forehead. She didn't like it if you were shuffling up papers. She would fire a question, you had to have an answer, even if it was wrong. Alex, you could write her afterwards and say, well, I said 55 million, but it's actually 56 million. She'd be fine with that. But you couldn't say, I don't know. And I remember coming out of one of those meetings and kind of leaning against the door jam and one of my officials saying, are you all right, Minister? And I said, I'm fine. I've just had the 3rd degree. Now I know what an Egyptian mummy felt like as they drew out its brain through its nostrils with pincers. And she was like that. She would empty her head of everything. And when the eggs thing came up, it was a bit of a surprise because she had been a scientist and she could have read the reports like I did, and she could have been aware that we had an epidemic of food poisoning. And it wasn't normal funny stuff. It was very nasty. It was quite virulent. It was putting people in hospital. Every kidney dialysis machine in the country was in use. And we were getting messages from the Public Health Laboratory Service saying, you've got a problem. There's an epidemic and it's being traced to a new strain and it's in eggs. You're the Public Health Minister. What do you do? We knew that you could have an infected laying hen which might produce occasional infected eggs. The problem was you couldn't tell. They didn't smell or anything. They didn't go off in the fridge. But if you mix them into a cake mix, the cake would be fine, and the cake mix would put you in hospital. We did our utmost to persuade the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food, MAF, to do something about it, MAF. And it was full of farmers and civil servants who thought their job was to be the trade unionists for farmers. And there was some bad practice going on. And if you think about it, Alex, that kind of attitude in MAF led to BSE soon after, which cost us billions. And then in Blair days, it led to foot and mouth disease, which also cost billions. I mean, sooner or later, the scientists have to be given some respect.
In 2001, when the secret government report was eventually saw the light of day and said, yes, actually there was endemic within production, doesn't mean a majority of eggs, but within the production system, salmonella. You were no longer in the Commons then, but was there a feeling of vindication?
It's something now that I feel quietly proud of. I don't think I was wrong back in 1988, 30 years ago, and I'm pleased that we now have really clean food. It's now safe enough for nursing mothers, people whose immune systems are compromised, people on cancer treatment. They can eat eggs. They can eat them safely. And they couldn't then, and I'm pleased with that.
I watched a video of a debate you did at Oxford a year or two back, where your silver tongue was very much in evidence. You made a lovely speech, humorous. You won over the student body, but you won them over to an argument which you wouldn't expect to find much sympathy. You were arguing that we're not all feminists now.
When it comes to feminism, a lot of modern feminism, the stuff that I heard around me, was all about how we women were being held back because you men were stopping us. And I'd look around and think, there's no man stopping me. What's stopping us is being willing to try, being willing to have a go, having a look at the system and seeing how successful people succeed. So in that sense, nobody was holding me back, and it wasn't a man. And you also destroy them, as I think Margaret showed, by just being better than those people. And she used to say, if the prejudice against women means that we have to be better than the men, that's fine. And then she'd giggle and say, that's easy. I'm a believer in equality under the law, which is why I campaign for gay rights. I am a believer in equality of opportunity, which is why I want our schools to be as good as they possibly can be. But I'm not really a believer in equality of outcome, because outcome in the end depends on how much hard work you do, your basic talents, how much ambition you have, how much you're prepared to put yourself out. And I don't believe that we should level down things in such a way that those that work harder only get the same as those who don't work as hard.
Welcome back. After the political cut and thrust of the brass neck and the silver tongue, Edwina has turned to a hugely successful writing career, the golden pen. She says she prefers writing fiction to enable her to tell the truth. But when she published the first edition of her diaries in 2003, she caused one almighty stir by revealing the truth about her relationship with former Prime Minister John Major. But first, I asked her about her work as a constituency Member of Parliament for Derbyshire. When Derbyshire South all these years ago, we're looking at Edwina Curry as the 21st constituency you went to and said this is an admirer of Margaret Thatcher, but she's pro-Europe. This is a proponent of equality and gay rights, which you were, but she's not a feminist. How do you think they judged this young woman who was coming forward to them? I mean, what did they see in this kaleidoscope of attitudes?
When you get into a constituency as well, you realise very quickly that your 80,000 constituents are not clones of you. So you're going to have to represent people with a wide variety of opinions and ideas. And you'd be well advised to genuinely do what all politicians say they do, but they don't. Just go in there and listen. And so for the mining, I asked if I could go into the miners' welfare, and which was a club, social club, and just sit down and get to know them. It was obvious the pits were closing, and people were saying to me, we're digging dirt down there and it's dangerous. Your job is to get us something else to do. So that's when we were casting around for alternatives, and up pops Toyota. Why would Toyota come to Derbyshire? They wanted to be within the EU boundary because of quite a lot of exclusions for cars coming in from outside. They wanted to be in an area where nobody had ever made a car before because of the record of strikes in the car industry in Britain. They wanted 250 acres of clean flat land with all services laid on, and we had an old airfield.
Well, the members for Derbyshire now realise how important the single market would be to Toyota.
Do you know, the problem, Alex, is trying to get somebody like Toyota, before a vote, standing up and saying, this matters for us. And they didn't. And the same is true for...
before the referendum on Europe?
Before the referendum, business kept its head down. Partly, I think, because the polls...
David Cameron told them it was going to be all right.
Because the polls said it was going to be all right. I mean, really...
George Osborne said he had it all in hand. He was going to scare the pants off everybody.
Never trust a politician, even when they're in government. Nobody can ever predict the future.
We've looked at the brass neck, stood you in good stead in politics. We've looked at the silver tongue, which got you out of some scrapes and didn't get you out of some others. How about the golden pen? I mean, you started a writing career really when you were still a Member of Parliament, but then it flourished afterwards.
I like the idea of being able to put ideas into fiction, because you can tell the truth in fiction. You know, if you're writing a history or a biography or an autobiography, you have to check with the libel lawyers and stuff gets taken out.
That's why you're better to write about dead people.
Well, you're better to write a story, Alex. So you'll try one of these days. Everybody does sooner or later. Even Churchill wrote a novel. To be honest, I thought I was going to lose my seat. I didn't. I hung on to it with a 4,000 majority. And sat down with my agent, who said, what are you going to do now? And I said, what do you think I should do? You know, shall I write a biography of Margaret Thatcher or something like that? And he said, I've been reading your short stories. You're ready to write a novel. What would I write a novel about? He said, well, you know, you tell us the stories about what the boys in Westminster are up to when their wives think they're in London and the whips think they're in the constituencies. And I said rather snootily, well, some of us don't have wives. Some of us have husbands. He said, that's your novel. And I went away and I had characters called A, B, C, D and E, and each of them had a crisis in his life. If I remember rightly, 4 were MPs and 1 wanted to be an MP. And I wrote about 35,000 words. 1 had been raped, 1, it was, you know, the Jeremy Thorpe thing where the person that you've met arrives and says, hello, I'm here. And you think, oh, no, that's the last place I need you. 1 went home and found her husband in bed with the neighbour, which actually happened to one of our parliamentary colleagues. Anyway, 35,000 words, all a bit lively, as you say. And the agent kind of picked himself up from the floor and said, my God, I think we'll auction this. And it sold 250,000 copies and helped really get me cracking on a new life. And next thing I know, I've done 6. And Parliament has vanished behind me.
How did you find the move to broadcasting, to radio, to television? Was it just an extension of politics, or did it require more discretion?
I found radio suited me hugely, especially Radio 5, who I work for quite a lot, because it's live. The phone lines are always open. If people don't agree, they can call in. You listen respectfully to what they say, and then you explain why they may or may not be right. You very seldom have the whole thing to yourself, but by golly, it makes the brain work, and you're brought up against people who know more about some aspect of the topic than you do. TV is harder because there's cameras everywhere, and what you look like matters. And it shouldn't. Instinctively, I think that the way you look is not something over which you have that much control, especially as you get older. But that doesn't affect how they do their job. So I would rather be on radio than on TV most of the time. On the other hand, I mean, you're so special, I couldn't say no to you.
Well, they'll probably edit that bit out. You published your diary, the first edition of your diaries in 2003, which caused a sensation because you revealed an affair with John Major in the 1980s. What would you say to people looking back now? It's a bit off after 15 years, telling all. And would you do the same thing again if you had your time again, or do you think you were right to say what you did?
It's very hard to say whether you do the same again, because hindsight can be very useful, but it's not available at the time. What had got me really annoyed was John had written a memoir published in 1999, I think. A, I wasn't in it at all. And B, it was all a whitewash about how it was everybody else's fault that the 92 to 97 government had fallen apart. And this wasn't true. And I was particularly incensed because we'd had all the stuff at the party conference in 94 about back to basics and family values. Anybody in leadership should be very wary of suggesting that we're all perfect. Members of Parliament are human beings. They have the same human failings as everybody else. The relationship between John Major and me wasn't a power play of any kind. It was one of equals. But I felt that his view that it was always somebody else's fault. Back to basics was him. Talking about family values was him. And of all people, he should have known, don't go there. Don't go there. By all means, be anxious and worried about your colleagues if they are fiddling their expenses. Be anxious and worried about them if they're taking money for putting down parliamentary questions. That's corrupt. But their personal behaviour should be none of your business. And you know that more than anybody.
In John Major's defence, I think his editor said that the omission of you from his memoirs was the editor who did it. And secondly, he's always argued that back to basics wasn't meant to be about personal morality. It was like, going back to school and learning the 3 R's and having toilets and motorways or something. You don't think there's anything in that?
Here we are. In the 1990s, we're moving towards a more open and more accepting society in so many ways. Blair latched onto it very, very quickly. We should not be saying, we have the virtue, you should vote for us. Because an awful lot of people are going to look at us and say, well, let's just go back through the notebook and just check how much virtue you really got. In any case, that's not what you should be campaigning on. You should be campaigning on competence. You should be campaigning on how you run the country, how you run the economy. John did not turn out to be the Prime Minister that we had expected when we encouraged him and promoted him and pushed him in 1990, and he successfully won that election. He turned out to be a very weak Prime Minister, and anybody that lets their editor cut stuff out is a weak writer as well. Let me be absolutely fair, because I'm not hostile at all. What John was able to do and should have credit for was actually starting the whole process in Northern Ireland that slowly got us toward peace.
Michael Foot once said of David Steele that he'd gone from boy wonder to elder statesman with no intervening period whatsoever. But in your elder stateswoman period, you haven't lost any of your attitude to life or the silver tongue or the golden pen. So where do you think Edwina Currie's got to contribute politically now? Is there a remaining political ambition? Is there a stamp you would like to a mark you'd like to leave in politics that you've still got? Is there a speech you've still got to make? Is there a book you've still got to write?
Wherever you are in life, you can make a contribution to society, and you should. And you can make a living, you can make something of where you are, and you can enjoy it. So I am now nearly 72. My husband's 77, he's had 3 different bouts of cancer, and we are lucky and blessed that he's still with us and still the awkward customer that I married a very long time ago. And what I would like to do now, and what I do now, is sometimes be the voice of older people. We have 15 million retired people in this country, most of whom are causing no trouble at all, paying their way. Most are taxpayers. They have been savers. They own their properties. They've never been in trouble in their lives, and they are enjoying life. They are the volunteers who run the WI, the churches, the political parties. They are the people you'll find running community centres, Citizens Advice Bureau, everything. Anything you can do, you're going to have retired people. What's the image of retired people? That we are bunging up beds in the NHS, that we are holding on to assets that young people want. A heck of a lot of that is simply not fair. And I will stick up for older people like myself, and enjoy doing it. I don't wear beige, as you can see, and we drive an electric car, and we have solar panels on the roof, and I'm into Twitter and Facebook and all the rest of it. And I'm typical.
So you'll speak for the plain people of England?
Well, last time I tried doing something like this, I was part of a little group that went to harangue the head of BBC One about how few positive images of older people there were on TV. We were either seen as a joke or we were seen in a hospital bed. And next thing I know, my agent phones me and says, "You're on Strictly Come Dancing. They're going to have more old people on it."
Edwina, I have the secret of eternal life. And it's not just the receptacle, it's what you place in it. This is a quaich, Scots Gaelic for a loving cup. So you put the whiskey, only Scots, in the quaich, and then the rest is very, very easy indeed. Thank you so much for being on the Alex Salmond Show.
That's lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Isn't that nice? Are we supposed to drink it together?
You have to supply the whiskey.
We have it.